Thank you very much, Mr. Rutte. The first reaction is positive. A standing ovation, I think is a good message from the European Parliament. The next speaker is the first Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Timmermans. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I want to start by thanking Prime Minister Rutte for praising former Dutch foreign ministers. That's always a good thing to do. Listening to Prime Minister Rutte, I was thinking about one of the most important contributions the Dutch nation has made to Europe as it now stands. And I have to take you back to 1581, when, after a long struggle with the Spanish king, the Dutch Parliament, if you could call it at the time States General, declared that since the king did not perform his duty vis-à-vis the Dutch population, he had in fact left the throne, vacated the throne. This act of verlatingen is the first document in European history where it said that sovereignty is in the hands of the people and for them to give to the rulers. And I think this has later also been the inspiration for the Declaration of Independence in the United States and for the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in France. And therefore it constitutes, I believe, an essential element of today's Europe and our values. I wanted to take you back briefly to the Dutch Republic because the Dutch Republic, once it had obtained its independence and freedom, flourished incredibly to become a world power. And the elements of that were openness, were entrepreneurial attitudes, were audacity to try and sail all over the world, but were also respect for diversity, curiosity about what is different, openness to other religions and other beliefs, putting an end to persecution of people who had different beliefs. And it's interesting, if you follow Dutch history, that in those times when we were open towards what is different, we did well. And in those times we became introspective. We became afraid of what is different. We set our back to the outside world. We declined and we became irrelevant in the world politics. And I think this applies for Europe today. And I really, on behalf of the European Commission, want to thank the Prime Minister for the sense of urgency he has expressed today before this Parliament. This sense of urgency should be guiding what we do right now, because the unthinkable has become possible. Who would have said 5 years ago the European Union can break up and disintegrate? Nobody. It was gratuitous to attack the European Union and its institutions because they were unbreakable anyway. And now we have seen, as a consequence of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as a consequence of all these crises we've had, that the European Union is not unbreakable, which means that it's valuable. Something that is breakable and fragile can be extremely valuable, and that is the European Union. So this is the time for people who believe in the European Union to stand up and come together and show unity. And this is precisely what the Prime Minister has advocated today, and I warmly welcome that. What is creating this brittle element in our union? I believe, to sum it up, it is arguably moral hazard. The union functions because member states trust each other that they will do what we agreed collectively. This trust has been eroded over the last 10 years between North and South, East and West, within the East. And if we do not confront the issue of moral hazard, if we do not take that away, if we do not take that out of our union, how could we ask our member states and our people to share their destinies? I can only share a destiny with someone I trust and I can rely on when I'm in trouble. If that is not the case, I will withdraw because it is too risky for me. And I believe that where it starts, and that's my very, very urgent call upon the Prime Minister as member of the European Council, if I look back over the last couple of years, what is the issue that has brought the European Union to the brink? It's the issue of migration. The issue of migration has played a key role in all of our member states, wherever we are. And only if we as a European Union can convince our citizens that we do have an answer to this, not denying migration, not pretending you can solve it by building fences and building walls, not pretending that you can solve it by just letting everybody in. If you understand that we need a comprehensive approach of the migration issue, and that only at European level will this comprehensive approach be valuable and work, if we cannot convince our member states and our citizens of that, then we will be in the same situation as the Dutch citizens were in 1581. You have vacated your seat because you are not capable to deliver to the citizens what they demand as your sovereign, namely security and management of a migration issue that will be with us within generations. And I would call on the Prime Minister to use everything he can during the upcoming European Council to try and help the Bulgarian presidency bring the issue forward. And I feel strongly supported by what President Tajani said yesterday, where he called upon the European Council to see what Parliament has done in this line of work, to see what Parliament and Commission have proposed together. And I think this is a good basis for a solution of this problem. We cannot leave our member states alone with the issue. This is something Europe needs to solve. That is being big on big things. One of the challenges that is new to us, which comes from the outside, is the fact that for the first time since 1945, we now have a president in the United States who apparently believes that a disunited Europe is more in the interest of the United States than a united Europe. This is completely new and a paradigm shift. Again, this calls for Europe to be united. And I, these days, remember very well John F. Kennedy going to Berlin, and at Berlin's worst hour, saying to people in Berlin, I am one of you. I am one of you, and I will make sure that you will continue to live in liberty. That's an American president I am inspired by. Also by Ronald Reagan, going to Berlin again and saying to Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. That is an American president I'm inspired by. And he helped the great European liberators, Wojtyła and Wałęsa, to do what was necessary to bring freedom to the whole of Europe. That is an American president one can be inspired by. And I would echo what the Prime Minister said. The foundations of our relations with the United States on the basis of our values are extremely strong and cannot be destroyed by one president and one administration. And the more unity Europe has on the basis of international rules, on the basis of our values, the more chance we will have to help the Americans return to that same path, because we are linked, our destinies are linked with the Americans because we share so many values. In conclusion, Mr. President, I would also like to echo what the Prime Minister said on the nature of our unity. After 1945, our unity was built on a tripod of democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. This tripod is indispensable if we want to maintain and strengthen our union. You cannot use democracy against the rule of law, nor can you use the rule of law against democracy, nor can you use those against the respect for human rights. This is, by the way, how in times of dictatorship in Eastern Europe it worked. When we would criticize the democracy, they would say, but our constitution describes, so they used the so-called rule of law, which was in fact rule by law, as justification for not having democracy. But you cannot do the other way around either. You cannot say, because I've got a majority, I can do with the rule of law whatever I like. I am the rule of law. That is not, then again, if that is your position, you return to the rule by law, which is at fundamental odds with the nature of our union. And I want warmly to thank the Prime Minister for now saying very clearly on behalf of the Dutch government that yes, the instruments of the Union are important, our common market, and we need to perfect it, a lot to do. Our common currency, which is not perfect yet, a lot still to do. Finding a budget for the European Union, which is not perfect yet. We made a proposal. I think it does comply with some of the criteria set out by the Prime Minister, but that's all up for debate. We'll get there. But all these things have no importance and no value if they are not founded on the basic values that brought Europeans together after such a long period of strife and dictatorship. Our freedom is founded on our values, not on our market, not on our currency, but on the values we share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Timmermans. Ora procedo alla chiusura del sistema per la registrazione elettronica delle richieste per il catch the eye. Leaders of the group, please. It's important now to respect your speaking time, because 1 minute more for you is 1 minute less for your group. Mr. Weber, you have the floor.
So, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, dear Prime Minister, welcome in the European Parliament. Good to have you here. After this weekend, after the G7 weekend, or should I call it the G6 weekend, I want to focus on external affairs in my contribution today. Some would say that probably after Donald Trump in 3 or 7 years' time, the old system of partnership with America will come back. I don't think so. I think we are in a historical moment on a crossroad. And I think we have to decide in which direction we want to go as European Union, like you said also in your contribution. And the alternatives are clear. National egoism, that the European Union is a community of those who are dreamers of the past, of the empires of our history, or whether we are a real global power as Europeans. The positive thing is probably that the decision is in our hand. We decide about our future. The need is obvious. You mentioned MH17. I want to underline that you have the full support of my group and I think of the whole House, that we have to find the responsible, and Russia has to contribute to investigation, to an independent investigation. But having this concrete point in mind, Mr. Prime Minister, the key question is, how do we come to conclusions in external affairs in the European Union? Because today, foreign affairs policy is, frankly speaking, horse trading in the European Union. A continent of 27 member states with 500 million people can be blocked by only one country in this European Union. And we are obviously weak in this regard. We have a friendship group of China inside of the Council. We have a friendship group of Russia inside of the Council. We have a friendship group of Iran in the European Council. You can buy countries at the moment to get influence in this European Union, and you can block everything. That's why you have to answer one concrete question. The Commission will come up with a proposal to use the Lisbon Treaty to change the unanimous decision-making process on external affairs, to switch into majority decision. If we don't do so, we will be weak. If we do so, we will be strong. So we need your answer on this concrete question. Another aspect is about our priorities for our external affairs activities. I think the Middle East is key. The EU is the biggest donor, but with the fewest impact in the region. So can we use our humanitarian power to create peace in Syria, yes or no? And on Africa, that is probably the biggest priority for all of us. We have to do an open market approach. Trade is key for creating development in Africa, and a Marshall Plan is needed. And there I want to reflect on the MFF discussion. You spoke about the MFF. First, let me underline that it is not, I think, really fair when you talk about the proportional burden sharing in the European Union, because the mechanism of financing the European Union is clearly linked to the GDP. So 1% is 1%, 1.1 is 1.1, and 1.3, which is the idea of the European Parliament, is 1.3. So it is proportional in any way. So don't tell the people that this is not proportional, what we are doing here. The key question is whether we are ready to finance the strengths of the European Union. When we do new investments in the Defence Fund, when we do new investments on a Marshall Plan for Africa, and when we want to have a strong border control with additional Frontex officers, then we have to finance this, and you have to finance this. I want to add, when we talk about external affairs, also some general ideas. We need a clear understanding about what is our role as Europeans in this global development. Today's world, Franz was mentioning this, is dominated by America first. Egoism against partnership. Our history was the same, the history of Europe. National egoism against partnership. And we had a game changer. We had the creation of the European Union as a game changer. A way, a mechanism to find solutions in a civilized way. Having this in mind, dear friends, I think the European Union is probably a model for today's world. Less than a nation, more than an international organization. A key to solve problems and to avoid conflicts. Probably today's European Union is an alternative to the approach of Donald Trump. Ladies and gentlemen, if we have this in mind, I think we also have to talk about the hard power of the European Union. We are talking about the military activities of our continent. We did a lot with PESCO now, with creating a headquarter. Please allow me on this aspect only to pick out one detail, because you talked about to respect agreements on European level. I want to ask you about the implementation of the PNR agreement, because there is also an important security aspect, but it is not fully implemented in Netherlands. But coming back to the military activity, I want to ask you, what do you think about creating common initiatives in this field? My group is believing that in drones and in cyber war, in new security challenges, we should, from the beginning on, start with EU forces, with EU activities. On the long term, we have to work for a European army, but on short term, I think it would be much more cost efficient if we would do this together already at the beginning. And finally, if you allow, I want to say that the headline for our external affairs policy is, what is Europe all about? The European Union is a force for peace, is a power of peace. In Iran, we showed that sanctions worked and the treaty works. It's better to have an agreement than to send troops. The same in North Korea, and even in Ukraine, we told our friends that the weapon will not create more peace. So Europe, as a continent who stands on global level for peace, that is a great image for the future. Thank you so much.
Onorevole Bullmann, you have the floor.
Prime Minister, a warm welcome from the Social Democrats in the House as well. We listened to your speech, and I have to admit I like the general idea of talking about urgencies. I like the general idea of, yes, talking about leadership. And if I got it right, and I'm one of those you will find on the site, I also liked your metaphors, go west, because this is very familiar to this House. We are permanently detecting new territoire, new areas of our work. We are building Europe each and any day from the scratch in a new mode towards a new direction. And if I got it right, you were also talking about the John Wayne spirit, which I like as well. But what do you think about the organizers of A Trek to the West, where the organizers say to the farmers, well, the territoire in front of you is dangerous, you will have bad weather, there is a multiplication on criminal gangs which you have to face, and to make you more efficient, I provide you with less water, less food, and less horses. And at the end of the day, that makes you quicker, and you will, with less resources, get to the other side in a better way. What do you think, at the end of the day, how many of these farmers would have then ended up in California? And what do you think John Wayne would have said to the organizers once the organizers would have tried to get him on board as a possible scout? So I have questions to this narrative, and I don't think that this narrative is in itself convincing. So please explain your position on the European budget, because this is my metaphor on that. I would also join forces with you and hope that we can have a joint initiative in making clear to Mr. Tusk that Dublin reform and that the situation of the refugees in the Mediterranean has to be the top priority on the next summit. the top priority, and I would like to echo the interest of the European Parliament that nothing is postponed anymore. My question is, can you support this position in the best interest of those people who are threatened to drown in the Mediterranean, in the best interest of the dignity of the European Union? And to make it very concrete, talking to the expert in the House, for instance, to my colleague, Liberal colleague in 't Veld this morning, also in the concrete legislation, this moment we are discussing, the Coreper is discussing the reception directive, close to a compromise. The only potential deal breaker I hear is the Council insisting on a by principle detention of children. What would John Wayne have said to this question, that you by principle have to organize the detention of children, to have a reception culture for foreigners and for migrants and for refugees? You could take the lead, talking about leadership, immediately ask one of your guys, of your colleagues, to phone up your ministers and your civil servants in the Coreper and clarify on that, so that we perhaps get a solution right done already today. Again, talking about a joint spirit, John Wayne, again, forgive me today, but it was so close to my heart. What would he have said to the leaders of a country where he had to pay taxes for the coffee he buys, but those who sell the coffee do not need to pay taxes? It would have potentially a dangerous conversation with him, because what would have been his position on tax havens and the defense of tax havens, like you see that in the Netherlands? So it's an interesting question. Mein Schlusswort in Deutsch, weil man sagt ja zu Recht, dass wir uns gar nicht so unähnlich sind, was wir beide nicht so gerne hören, weder die Niederländer noch die Deutschen. Wir haben euch immer bewundert für die vielen Dinge, die Frans Timmermans aufgezählt hat. Wir geben es kaum zu, sogar beim Fußball, Football Total. Es ist ja kaum einzugestehen, dass wir euch eigentlich sogar dabei gelegentlich bewundern. Aber was ihr machen müsst, und das ist mein Appell als regionaler Nachbar, Herr Premierminister, bringen Sie die Niederländer, bringen Sie Ihren Staat, bringen Sie Ihre Gesellschaft in die erste Linie der Reform der Europäischen Union. Wir brauchen die Niederlande als einen Reformfaktor, einen aktiven Faktor, um die Zukunft Europas zu bauen, gegen die Populisten, gegen diejenigen, die Europa kaputt machen wollen. Sind Sie in der ersten Linie, lassen Sie uns Klartext reden, das entspricht beider Mentalitäten. Keine Ausreden mehr, wir müssen es gemeinsam anpacken.
Per il gruppo dei conservatori e riformisti la parola all'onorevole Van Dalen.
Heel hartelijk welkom, meneer Rutte. We kunnen hier gewoon Nederlands spreken hoor. We hebben uitstekende tolken. Die hebben het nu wel een beetje moeilijk, maar betere tolken vind je niet. In de Europese Unie is het Verenigd Koninkrijk altijd opgetreden als constructieve oppositie. Als tegenmacht tegen de te vaak overheersende as Duitsland-Frankrijk. In Berlijn heerst echter een oud trauma. Men wil nimmer meer opnieuw dominant worden. Dus uiteindelijk bepaalt binnen die Duits-Franse as Parijs wat er gaat gebeuren. En dat betekent, zeker nu met Macron, nog meer Europa. Door de exit van het Verenigd Koninkrijk valt in de Europese Unie het land weg dat op een nuchtere en constructieve manier tegenwicht bood. Hoog tijd dus voor Europa 2.0. Enter Mark Rutte. Als een van de langzittende Europese regeringsleiders is hij dé aangewezen persoon dat tegenwicht te gaan organiseren. En ook het moment is van groot belang. We zijn op weg naar 2019. Europese verkiezingen, een nieuwe commissie, onderhandelingen over het meerjarenbudget en natuurlijk de Brexit. En Europese politici als Macron, Juncker en Verhofstadt staan te trappelen om ook nu door te pakken. Dus nu is het moment voor Mark Rutte om dat tegenwicht op te pakken en de scepter van de Engelsen over te nemen en die tegenmacht te gaan organiseren. Rutte's toespraak in Berlijn dit voorjaar vormt denk ik een hele goede basis voor dat tegenwicht. En dat geldt ook in de samenwerking binnen de eurozone, waarin hij met een aantal noordelijke landen en Oostenrijk erbij probeert die eurozone op een nuchtere manier op te bouwen. Geen Verenigde Staten van Europa dus, maar een nuchtere benadering. Een bescheiden en vooral dienstbaar Europa dat afspraken nakomt en verbindt. Dus ook een bescheiden begroting, geen eurozone die transferunie wordt en een Europese Unie die Italië en Griekenland helpt met het migrantenvraagstuk. Het is nu tijd voor zo'n Europese Unie. Mark Rutte moet aan de bak. Gebeurt dat niet, dan zal de kloof tussen de burger en Brussel, die nu al groot is, onhoudbaar worden. Dank u wel.
Per il gruppo Alleanza Democratica e Liberali la parola all'onorevole Verhofstadt.
Ja, meneer de minister-president, beste Mark, welkom in het Europees Parlement. And I'm going to continue in English. I have to tell you, I agree with you. The new world order needs a new Europe, and it's completely useless and unproductive to continue a discussion now, already 20 years, about less and more and more and less. What we need is not more or less, it's new. It's something else, it's something different as the Europe we got in the past. And I liked the word you have used, a more perfect union. Because a more perfect union is a sentence for the American Constitution. And in the American Constitution, they are not talking about a bigger union or a smaller union. They're talking about a more efficient union, a more united union, a more perfect union. And I think that, and Frans Timmermans has done it, it's good to look to the past of the Netherlands to see where we have to go. Because the Netherlands, in my opinion, a little bit were an Europe avant la lettre. There were 7 independent provinces who worked together, beat the Spanish Armada with a little bit help of the Brits, but okay, we have forgotten that naturally for the moment. And also the bad weather helped them a lot. And then afterwards, in 1602, Mark, what the Netherlands did was uniting the fleets in one fleet, in one confederation, in one nation, establishing the Dutch Golden Age. That is the example that you have given to Europe. And what we have to do is to copy that. To copy that, and that means to create a European Golden Age in a certain way. A European Golden Age in a time where we are surrounded, I should say, by a circle of evil. And I mean with that Putin. I mean with that Erdogan. I mean with that also on a bad day, and that's nearly every day, Mr. Trump, for the moment. For example, in trade matters. A Europe that is also in solidarity with you, Mark, and with the Dutch people and the Dutch victims of MH17. And I ask to the Commission, to President Juncker, to President Tusk, to examine in what way, in the international court case in The Hague, we can be in full solidarity in that court case with the Dutch. Because what is happening, that the Russians continue to deny their responsibility, is a scandal, and Europe has to be behind the Netherlands on that issue, far more outspoken. But as we all know, Putin gets away with everything. The shooting down of the flight MH17, the cyber attacks against Baltic states, murders in the streets of London, killing of political opponents in Moscow, the occupation illegally of Ukraine and some regions in other Soviet republics. And I think it's time to wake up, certainly in a moment where we have an American president who is more comfortable with autocrats than with his old Western democratic allies. That's a wake-up call. That's the inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth is that if tomorrow there is an attack by somebody on European soil, we cannot be sure. Even so transatlantic we have, that the Americans will help us in the future. So we need to take our own responsibility. We need to build up our own European defence community, and I agree with Manfred Weber when he said we need to get rid of the unanimity rule in all these matters the fastest as possible, because that doesn't make any sense to continue like that. And our problem is in fact not only that we maybe have a difference of point of view on this issue, we have another problem, and that is that we have inside the European Union, inside the European family, a fifth column in our ranks. Let's be honest. I call them the cheerleaders of Putin. Farage, Le Pen, Wilders, and others, and the friends of them are sitting here, were in fact doing only one thing. They take the money from the Kremlin, they take the intelligence of the Kremlin, like Mr. Aaron Banks, for example, the friend of Mr. Farage, who was colluded and who helped, in fact, with the help of the Russians, even to have the Brexit. And I think it's time now that these people will work together, in fact, with Mr. Orban, but Mr. Weber has said nothing about Mr. Orban today. I'm a little bit disappointed. It's time that we stop this cooperation with people like Orban, Kaczynski, Salvini, who in fact are working with all these nationalists and these populists. And I'm pleased that you have talked about a Europe of values at the end of your speech and of your introduction, as Macron did, as Bettel did, as Charles Michel did. In fact, we as liberals can never accept the illiberal plot of these people. And we and you have to be in the front run to fight against them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verhofstadt. Yes, yes. For this, I want to thank you for this. And now, in name of the Green Group, Mrs. Ska Keller, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you, Prime Minister, for coming, for joining this debate, and also for bringing in the sense of urgency. I very much appreciate that, and also your very clear words on the rule of law, on the bad situation that we see in several countries in the European Union. So my question directly on that would be, what exactly are the Netherlands going to do in Council to support the Article 7 procedure on Poland, but also when it goes beyond Poland? What exactly are you going to do that? And I really appreciated your words as well about how the unity works and how we all depend on each other, because I think this is really true. We depend on each other. If we work together well, then we can all benefit from that. But if we're working apart, then we will all lose out. And you mentioned climate change as the obvious example for that, and I very much agree with that, and I can only applaud to your proposal that you've made on further reducing the CO2 emissions to 55% in the European Union. This is a really good way forward, because climate change is a threat to humanity, and we need to act. We need to get our acts together, and we have to move first, because if we don't, no one else will do so. But of course, in order to achieve that, you will also have to talk with your colleagues and your neighbours. You will have to make sure you get a majority in Council, because we in Parliament, we're not the problem. Actually, not even the others are the problem. The problem is the Council. So we're there. Please go ahead, put some pressure on your colleagues to make sure that we get to that aim. And if we can talk about dependency, I would also like to mention the fact that they're very much dependent on each other in economic terms. And economy is, I understand, a very central point in how you view the European Union and even how you view the world. And you have said that everyone needs to put their house in order. I think that's not the first time you've said that. You've said that repeatedly. But putting your house in order, it doesn't work if you say everyone puts their house in order and everyone does their thing and then all will be well. Because we have a common market, we have a common currency. We're all interlinked, our economies are interlinked. So if one wants to export, someone else needs to import. This is how it works. We're all interdependent on that. And if everyone has to save and save and save, then who's going to drive demand? And you've been very critical again here today of others not getting their budget in order. But I would say, actually, one of the reasons other countries are not managing to put their budget in order, that's actually you. It's your government and previous Dutch governments, by being a tax haven, by a long history of blocking and frustrating and delaying European action against tax avoidance. Bravo. And with that, With that, you're taking away other countries' income. Tax dodging by companies leads to costs of 50 to 17 billion a year in the European Union. That's money missing from our taxpayers. And you have just agreed in the Netherlands to please, apparently, multinationals like Unilever and Shell to give a tax break to companies that will cost the Dutch taxpayers 1.6 billion a year. And out of the 20 largest companies in Portugal, 19 have used Dutch letterboxes to avoid paying taxes in the midst of the economic crisis. So while Portugal was attacked for not saving enough, while in Portugal there were severe austerity measures, actually it was your country that helped companies avoiding to pay the taxes that would have helped Portugal. So how do you expect Portugal to get their house in order? And why do you actually not cooperate with your colleagues in the Council? You're competing with them. So actually, Mr. Rutte, less tax competition would actually be more. And promoting the single market might sound very pro-European in the context that we're all getting used to, but actually just sticking to free trade, deregulation, liberalization, that's the recipe of status quo. We need to be getting to a social Europe. We need to not forget that the European Union is not just a market, it's a place where people live, work, experience inequalities, have really social insecurities. That's where we need to get. We need to go to a social union, because if we're not having more social union, if we're not having more solidarity in the European Union, then we're not getting anywhere. And the European Union will be more social, we will have more solidarity, or it will have difficulties being. Thank you.
Per il gruppo confederale della sinistra unitaria europea Sinistra Verde Nordica, la parola l'onorevole De Jong.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. En een hartelijk welkom ook van Links Europa, van mijn fractie aan de minister-president van Nederland, de heer Rutte. Net als Peter van Dalen zei, je kunt hier prima in het Nederlands praten. Dat komt doordat we hele goede tolken hebben. Die hebben het niet een beetje moeilijk. Die hebben het hartstikke moeilijk, omdat hun arbeidsvoorwaarden hier verder worden uitgekleed en ze niet eens het recht op staken krijgen. Onze groep is daar solidair mee en ik hoop dat steeds meer groepen zich ook uitspreken voor de rechten van de tolken. Want dat staat wel voor iets breders. Als zelfs in dit huis, wat toch van de democratie in Europa zou moeten zijn, de arbeidsvoorwaarden niet meer worden de arbeidsrechten van mensen niet meer worden nageleefd. Als het allemaal is concurrentie, markt, 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 ja, dan kom ik eigenlijk uit bij Mark. Want uw speech in Berlijn, uw speech nu, dat zijn speeches waar ook steeds de markt centraal staat. Zelfs als het gaat om veiligheid, zelfs als het gaat om de rechtsstaat, dan is dat om bedrijven de ruimte te geven. En ik denk dat dat de foute ingang is. Als we eens kijken naar waar de markt goed voor geweest is. In Nederland 10%, 2/3 van het inkomen. De 90% moeten de rest verdelen. Als je naar de wereld kijkt, 1%, de helft van het vermogen in de hele wereld. 99% moet de rest verdelen. Dat is wat de markt doet. In Nederland, in Europa, in de hele wereld. En ik denk dat we het daarover moeten hebben. Wat doet u voor die 90%? Ook de Groenen zeiden het al. Waar is het sociale kant? Waar is de kant van eerlijkheid? En ik denk dat belastingen daar een rol in spelen. Ik denk ook dat wat we zien, dat kinderen op dit moment minder kansen hebben dan ze hadden, dan hun ouders hadden. Dat het toekomstbeeld voor mensen minder goed is. Ik denk dat dat de dingen zijn waar we over door moeten gaan. Gelijk loon voor gelijk werk, zei u op dezelfde plaats. Dat moest dan dat heeft u in Berlijn gezegd. U heeft het nu niet herhaald. Maar dat is een reëel probleem. Dat is een probleem omdat we nu, en we hebben stappen vooruit gezet met gedetacheerden, maar nog steeds zijn de sociale premies, zijn de pensioenen gericht. Dat zijn de pensioenen van het land van herkomst als mensen gedetacheerd zijn. Dus er is niet echt gelijk loon voor gelijk werk in die zin. Vrachtwagenchauffeurs, buschauffeurs, ze stonden hier buiten deze week en bij de vorige Straatsburg-sessie. Internationaal wegtransport heeft geen gelijk loon voor gelijk werk. Wat doet u voor die 90%? Wat doet u voor hen? En dan eigenlijk de culturele kant van de zaak. Ondernemingsgeest, daar hebben we niks op tegen, dat is goed. Maar waar we wel wat op tegen hebben, is het tegen elkaar uitspelen van mensen. Wat doen we om mensen te verbinden? Gaan we naar een samenleving met een rechtsstaat wellicht, maar waar wel ieder tegen ieder wordt opgezet? Of komen we bij een samenleving die verbindt? Gaan we voorbij markt? En ik zie ook dat, er wordt hier regelmatig verwezen naar Trump. Ja, kijk eens waar dat vandaan komt. Dat komt van die staalarbeiders in Detroit die zich alleen gelaten voelen. Die vinden dat ze de slachtoffers zijn van de globalisering. Daar heeft ook de commissie op gewezen. Als je dat niet aanpakt, dan krijg je het tegenovergestelde waarschijnlijk van wat u ook wil. Dan krijg je mensen die tegen elkaar opkomen, dan krijg je onveiligheid en dan komen we niet verder. Nog een opmerking over die 1%. U zit bij die 1%, dat zijn ook de grote investeerders, dat zijn de grote multinationals. En de laatste aanval, ik zou toch willen aanraden dat u eens kijkt naar Investigate Europe. Het is een NGO die in beeld gebracht heeft wat BlackRock is als investeringsmaatschappij. BlackRock heeft 6,3 biljoen US-dollars aan geld te beheren. En op dit moment zet BlackRock de aanval in op de collectieve pensioenen in Europa. We moeten allemaal individuele pensioenen hebben, daar kan BlackRock lekker op verdienen. En daarom ook een pan-Europees pensioenproduct wat je per persoon doet. Dat gaat de verkeerde kant op. Ik wil een solidair Europa en ik wil graag van u het antwoord wat uw visie is op een solidair Europa. Ik doe u één voorstel. Als we die markt nou eens reguleren, als we zeggen er komt een sociaal en groen protocol, aangehangen aan het Europees verdrag. De vakbeweging heeft dat jaren geleden al voorgesteld voor sociaal. U bent nu groen rechts, dus u wil waarschijnlijk ook wel instemmen met een groen protocol eraan hangen. Als we alles toetsen op solidariteit en duurzaamheid en we beteugelen de markt, zou dat niet leiden tot een Europa wat echt verbindt, wat stabiel is, wat echt stabiel is en waarmee we voorkomen dat we straks hier ook met een Trump zitten. Dank u wel.
Per il gruppo Europa della Libertà e della Democrazia Diretta, la parola all'onorevole Batten.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mr. Rutte, you spoke about listening to the people, but in Holland, of course, in 2005, you had a referendum on the constitution. That was ignored. We got the Lisbon Treaty, which was the constitution in another form. In 2016, the Dutch voted against the Ukrainian Association Agreement, and that's been ignored. The EU rule is to pay and obey. So if you can change that, then good luck to you. Now, Europe can have a great and prosperous future, but not if the European Union is planning it. The European Union is responsible for many of the problems that beset Europe, and your solution is always the same, to have more power. The European Union was always about creating an undemocratic state, a United States of Europe. And it's always been about deconstructing nation states and transferring political power to Brussels. That would be bad enough in itself, but you've actually made a complete mess of governing the member states. There are two areas in which this is obvious to the ordinary citizen: the economy and security. The creation of the euro was a political project, not an economic project, and was an entirely predictable disaster, and has brought about financial austerity and unemployment. The dead hand of European bureaucracy impedes business and makes it increasingly harder for small businesses to operate, to create new jobs and to grow prosperities. Your policies have blighted the lives of millions of people. Meanwhile, our security is endangered because of the results of mass immigration. Under Mrs. Merkel's leadership, you have brought in millions of people from Africa, the Middle East and beyond, and you intend to bring in millions more. You have turned many parts of Europe into foreign countries. You use the emotional blackmail argument of talking about helping defenceless refugee families, and yet the reality is that the vast majority of these migrants are young men from Islamic countries. This is not immigration, this is invasion. Traditionally, Europe resisted Islamic invasion. Heroic struggles in the siege of Malta at the gates of Vienna have now been replaced by abject surrender. Islam offers two options: submit or resist. You have decided to surrender and submit on behalf of your citizens, but some states are resisting. rebellion is now stirring in Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Austria and elsewhere. The tide is turning against the EU. And best of all, we have Brexit, a modern peasants' revolt against their out-of-touch overlords. When Britain leaves the European Union, we can point the way for a Europe of independent, democratic nation-states. Most people want a Europe of genuine trade, friendship and cooperation. They do not want rule from Brussels.
Hear, hear. Well said, sir.
Ricordo al pubblico presente in quest'Aula che non è consentito a coloro che assistono al dibattito applaudire o dissentire nei confronti degli oratori. Grazie. La parola ora per il gruppo Europa delle Nazioni e della Libertà all'onorevole De Graaf.
Mr. President, I welcome Mr. Rutte to this Parliament, and I guess we will see him quite often in the future when he has accepted the position of Mr. Tusk as President of the European Council. When we discuss the future of the EU, we must most certainly address the situation of the rule of law in the Member States. And the majority of this Parliament has serious concerns about the rule of law in Hungary, Poland, Malta, Slovakia. And therefore it has started the monitoring group on the rule of law. And your party is member of the ALDE, and a colleague of you in this Parliament, Ms. In 't Veld, presides over this monitoring group. Now, I advise this monitoring group to take the Netherlands as a reference case. In the Netherlands, the prosecution doesn't have the obligation to follow up on any reported offence. It's to the discretion of the prosecutor's office whether to take action. And therefore, millions of citizens in the Netherlands see the prosecution as a political tool. And this was recently confirmed in a report by the WODC, a scientific institution that advises the Dutch government. And the report stated that over the last decade, there has been no prosecution of extreme left violence. And I give you another example. A group of rejected asylum seekers looking for a place to stay last month broke into a house near Amsterdam, and they claimed the property as theirs and tried to chase away the inhabitants. Although this attempt failed, the state prosecution didn't want to take legal action, and they allowed this behaviour. To me, it's absolutely clear that applying the law to one group and letting another off the hook creates legal inequality. It breaks the rule of law. And these are the Netherlands of Mr. Rutte and Mrs. In 't Veld today. I have a serious advice to Mr. Rutte with regard to his European ambitions. If you want an EU where the rule of law applies, start at home. And I quote, get your house in order. And have the prosecution take action against illegal activities in general, not just against so-called populists. And the second issue I would like to address is illegal migration. The EU is in a complete deadlock on how to deal with illegal migrants. The EU has no solutions. It doesn't close its borders. It doesn't expel rejected asylum seekers. It doesn't fight Islamization and radicalization. So I urge Mr. Rutte to distance himself from Ms. Merkel's refugee welcome policies and endorse the Visegrad approach. And he could start by helping illegal migrants a criminal offence, reject asylum to migrants who enter via safe third countries, let asylum seekers who go on holiday in their home country lose their right to stay. And when you are President of the European Council, recommend the whole package that we proposed yesterday to the Member States. Thank you.
La parola all'onorevole James, non iscritto.
Good morning, Prime Minister, and thank you for coming to the Chamber and for taking questions. I've got three for you, sir. Now, the first one concerns trade, and you've made the point that the Dutch economy depends on trade with the United Kingdom as a result of the Rotterdam effect. Now, I do appreciate the points you made about the single market and why, therefore, you would want the United Kingdom to remain part of that. But you've also effectively admitted the issue of punitive tariffs post-Brexit, making no economic sense for your own country. Can we ask, therefore, that you champion not only support for a free trade deal for the United Kingdom post-Brexit, but that you also champion free trade change within the remaining European Union member states? My second question, please. You raised the issue of rule of law and electoral process. Now, you, I hope, will be aware of billionaire George Soros, a fifth columnist, to use a phrase used this morning, interfering in a democratic referendum result on Brexit in the United Kingdom. Can I ask, how would you deal with that sort of political interference, and how will you try and influence European Union policy to stop that degree of national affront to democracy and affront to national democratic process? Thank you.
Ora la parola al primo ministro Rutte per rispondere alle domande che sono state poste dai presidenti dei gruppi. Prego.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll continue in English if that is okay, but of course, with all respect I have for the translators. First of all, to the first Vice President of the European Commission, thank you very much for your gracious remarks, dear Frans. And you made this point of the moral hazard, and I think that was exactly right, because there is this lack of trust which creeped into the European Union in the last 10 years because of moral hazard. So I was very happy that you made that point, and we have to work on that. You also made the point of migration, and other speakers in this first round also made the point of migration, and that it is crucial to come to an agreement also at the level of the European Council. We are very much pushing for that, to make that happen at the European Council taking place on June, at the end of this month. But it is not easy. It is not easy, because at the moment, between the North and the South, but also with the countries in the East, there are still a lot of debates going on. And this whole notion of solidarity, of burden sharing, of making sure that everyone is involved and that we find an acceptable compromise, I'm not very optimistic at the moment that we will come to conclusions at the end of June. We need your help there, and the European Parliament can push for this. Also, Mr. Bullmann made this point, so also in reaction to you on this issue. Then, on the situation with the United States, this was also a point made by Mr. Weber, made by Guy Verhofstadt and others. I have always been raised by the absolute conviction that the transatlantic bond between Europe and the United States, anchored not only in a joint security imperative, but also in the fact that we share values across the Atlantic Ocean, that we are very much anchored in the same type of history, makes it crucial that together we keep on working on the transatlantic bond. It is not easy, but I cannot foresee that without the United States we can solve any major crisis in the world. And for our defense, it is crucial that we keep the dialogue with the United States going, even if within that family relationship we have some serious quarrels at the moment. And yes, Frans, you can count on the Netherlands where rule of law is concerned. I know that you personally, within the Commission, are working very hard on this. And Ms. Keller, you made a point about Article 7. And let me assure you that the Netherlands and my government is fairly and squarely behind Frans Timmermans and the entire European Commission on this issue. There can be no doubt. And I'm happy that I know that the whole Commission is behind this. Then, Mr. Weber, on the issue of the multi-annual financial framework. Yes, I agree. We have new priorities which we need to address. But at the same time, and this is also a point I would like to make in the direction of Mr. Bullmann, we have to acknowledge that 70% of the European budget at the moment is spent on the priorities of yesterday. So why not think about what we can do in terms of making savings there to free money up for new priorities? And Mr. Bullmann, you made this analogy again with John Wayne. But when John Wayne and his people in those days, when that story played out, when the United States was working on pushing that frontier westwards, there was no government at that moment to help them. There was no central system. It was the farmers themselves making sure that by pooling their wagons in a circle, they created that safety. And luckily at the moment we have governments, we have collective security. And absolutely we need to work with our members. But it would be my point that considering this budget and what we need to do, that we cannot just discuss new money, we also have to look at where we can find the money. And I'm simply against the 1.3%. I think if you really want to make the parties at the extreme much bigger than they are today, keep on pushing for 1.3%. It's the best recipe. Then, on PNR, I completely agree with Mr. Weber. The legislation to implement PNR has been submitted to our parliament and is being discussed in our house. And we have already set up our national organization and notified the Commission. So it is not yet through Parliament, but we are working on that. And I know that at the moment, I believe 14 countries have implemented this legislation, and I think still half have to come, and we are in the second half and working on that. Then on the military side. Military mobility is one of the things the Netherlands is pushing at the moment within NATO and within the EU. And we are very much behind the initiatives President Macron is making to get a more effective base to organize defense within the European Union. But at the same time, I would argue that we should not now push for new symbols like a European army. These are symbols. We have to make sure that we get things done in practice and that we get in that sense, satisfactory results for our citizens. So I'm not in favor of these symbols like a European army. I'm very much in favor of working in the next 5 to 10 years on practical things like, for example, military mobility. And I know that I can count on your group on this important priority. Then on the issue of taxation, also for the Netherlands, we acknowledge the importance of combating tax avoidance, also at the EU level. It is an important issue, taxation. It is an important issue in this House, but also particularly, I believe, in the parliaments of the member states. Taxation is a key element of the political systems in our democracies. And in the treaty, they are therefore part, and I believe rightly so, part of the member states' competencies. We are working at this moment on letterboxes and how to provide and how to make sure that we take the necessary next steps in that sense. And I was very happy to see that the Commissioner Moscovici, was very appreciative of the Dutch initiative in that sense. That's also a reaction to Mrs. Keller and Mr. Boelman. Then on, and it is also Peter van Dalen raising this issue, Udo Boelman raising this issue, reform. And is the Netherlands pushing reform within the EU? Yes, we are. We are pushing for radical reform. Yes, we are working on new alliances within the EU. The fact that the UK is leaving means that we have, as a Netherlands, and we are the 5th largest economy of the European Union, we have to work on how are we going to organize our relationships with other countries. And of course, always our relationship with Germany and France will be crucial. And when I listened to President Emmanuel Macron's speech in the Sorbonne last September, I agree with most of the points he made there. And we have agreed to work together on issues like migration, the G5 Sahel, outer borders, particularly also on climate change and pushing for this 55% CO2 emission target. But at the same time, we are working with other countries to find the balance within the EU, to make sure that with the UK leaving, and the fact that therefore that power balance is shifting, that we from the Netherlands try to work also on new alliances. And yes, indeed, we are working closely together with the Baltic states and the Scandinavian countries, but also with Austria, with Ireland, with Spain, and on other issues with Portugal. So it can be bilaterally, it can be multilaterally, so that within the EU, that helps to come to sensible decision making. And therefore, it is much more nuanced, I would say, in reaction to Mr. Van Dalen than saying it is a counterbalance to France and Germany. The moments they agree on a policy are very scarce. And sometimes it is good that they can agree on issues because they are the two biggest member states. But there is no automaticity that when they agree that things are pushed forward. And it is not an automaticity that they agree. In many cases, as we all know, they very much disagree. And that helps the debate also in those areas. Then, Mrs. Keller, I think you also have to do something. Because yes, I have to work, I agree, and the Dutch government, and together with France, to work on this support for the 55%. But please don't leave it to me. You have this big house here. We had the applause. So please help. We have to do this collectively. And it was exactly the plea I was making in my speech. I need the European Parliament because without your pressure, also in your member states, to push for that emission target, we will never get there. Mr. de Jong, of course we disagree on many issues, not on the Dutch language, but on many other issues. But still, I would argue, when you were bashing the free market, that thanks to the free market, hundreds of millions of people in the last 10, 15 years have been lifted out of poverty worldwide, thanks to the free market. Let's not forget that. And on one thing we fully agree. I didn't mention it in my speech. But same pay for the same work in the same type of circumstances is at the core of the belief of the Dutch government. And we will push for that. And I know that collectively we are working on that to make that happen, also for the transportation sector. Mr. Batten, you addressed Brexit. And can I remind you that the president of the governor of the central bank of the United Kingdom has made this calculation that already now the cost of leaving United Kingdom, leaving the European Union, is £900 per average British family. That is the cost at the moment already British families are incurring, and that will rise. And therefore, that maybe not for you personally, but this is happening at the moment. And what I found in the Netherlands at this fact, but also the fact that it is hurting our collective security, is the best argument why the others need to work more closely together. So in that sense, thank you for that. But I'm still very pessimistic about the fact that you are very somber about the fact that you are leaving the European Union. And finally, Mrs. James, on Brexit, let me assure you that the Dutch government is fairly and squarely behind Michel Barnier and what he is doing as our negotiator in this process. And can you help to make sure that from the British side we get more clarity as soon as possible, particularly on the issue of the Irish border? I believe that is crucial to move and push that subject forward, which is important for all of us. Thank you, Mr. President.